Okay, we are up and running. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you all here. We're going to be dealing with some very difficult topics. For those of you that are in the room, I don't think anyone's going to have trouble with this. For those of you watching at home, this may be a video you want to review first before you share it with young children. But let's get down to the meat of it. What happens if you are forced to break a commandment? What happens if you are I mean forced. I don't mean like, it was running late and, I didn't get home before Shabbat started. That's handled in very different sets of laws. I'm talking about the classic example, which happened far too often during our history, of convert to this religion or die. Work on Shabbat or die. Have sex with that guy's wife or this whatever or die. If you are compelled to break a commandment.
No, life is first.
Okay, so life is first. Now,
the preservation of your own.
Yes.
The preservation of your own life. Yeah. So if I say, please murder him.
No, in that case, I have to take, I can't save my own life by murdering someone else.
So the question,
sure you can. That's exactly what I told you could do.
The question is, what type of commandment is it that you're being asked to violate?
Well,
if
so
it's to kill, or
right.
is it as simple as
just pork or something?
Right.
Right.
Right. Go pick radishes on Shabbat.
Yeah.
Or
I'll kill you, or
kill
this
some
person, or I'll kill you.
Right. So there's definitely within Jewish law a demarcation between the big three and everything else. It gets a little more complicated than that. But I don't want to talk about what you should do. I want to talk about what happens if you don't do what you should do. So, for example, imagine there's a invasion of bandits, and the bandits just really like having fun by messing with people. They come into your village, and they say, I want you to kill him, or else I'll kill you. And you go, I know that the Torah, the Talmud, and all of our sages have told us that I should rather die than kill him, but I'm a coward. And you know what? Bam! Can I go now? Yeah, can I go now?
Wow.
When the bandits leave, when the bandits are gone, and we all then turn to her and go, wait a minute. I thought we were taught and trained that we were supposed to give up our lives rather than doing something like murder. Do we arrest the person who did this? Do we take them to court? The same question comes up later on in questions of the conversos, those who converted to Christianity or converted to Islam under compulsion. If they later escape from those countries and move to places where they can practice their Judaism freely, do we punish them as apostates?
No.
Do we say, well, but they weren't supposed to do that, right? They were better to martyr yourself than to give in.
Under duress.
They were under duress. They were under duress. So what we're going to look at today is, what do we mean when we say you're under duress? And what does that cover, if you will? And why is it that Torah and our sages have this concept of duress? Because if you think about it from a different point of view, it makes no sense, right? So there's two different ways to look at what happens when you are fulfilling a commandment or committing a transgression. Right? There's one way, which is to say that, right, this is me now, and this is me later. And if I do a commandment, which is going to get a positive sign because it's a good thing, then me later is going to be, going to be positive. I'm going to be better than I was later, right? Every time I keep one of the commandments, every time I avoid doing something wrong, I am improving my own spirit. I am improving my own soul. I am becoming better and better and better. That's one model. And of course, the negative would also apply. Every time I commit a transgression, I am diminishing myself. I'm harming myself in the way that I will be less and less capable to reach for higher levels of life, meaning, purpose, spiritual achievement, et cetera, et cetera. That's one model. There's another model, which says, There's me. And there's the universe on a cosmic plane. Right? Not the universe of atoms and molecules and gravity and light and all of that, but the universe which is beyond human understanding, the mystical universe, if you will. Even more than spiritual, because there's much of Judaism that tends to treat spirituality as being materialist. Not exactly, because of course the spirit goes on, but the idea that it's something at least almost tangible. But this is talking really about the cosmic forces of all of existence beyond the material plane and beyond human understanding. And in this model, when I do something good, I am creating positives within that cosmic plane, right? I am shaping the state of the mystical existence of reality. And if I do something negative, then I am damaging the cosmic plane, right? On a supernatural level, if you will, I am causing harm to existence. Well, duress makes perfect sense here, right? If I am under duress and someone forces me to do something bad, then I'm not actually going to be harming myself by doing it, because I know that I only did it because I was forced to do it. But here, whatever my intention was, if I did it, I have damaged the nature of reality. I have damaged the mystical fabric of existence. Doesn't matter whether you put a gun to my head or not. It happened, right? Give you one more example, taking duress out of the equation to show the difference between this. Imagine this model up here, and you are happily eating your hamburger, and you bought it at the kosher butcher, and wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And then suddenly you are reading in the Jewish newspaper that the kosher butcher has actually not been selling kosher meat. Right? An investigative reporter, the undercover cameras, they found out that what he was selling wasn't actually kosher meat, that he was just buying it at Winn-Dixie and marking up the price. You look down at your hamburger, half of which is now inside of you, and you realize that you've just been eating treif. And now you did everything right. You went to a kosher butcher, you made sure that they weren't mixing meat and milk and all the other things, and you went to somebody that you believed was reputable. In this model, no real harm has come to you or anything else. You definitely put down the rest of the hamburger and don't eat anymore. You definitely don't go back to that butcher. You make sure that you find out before you buy meat from a different butcher that this person is more reputable and has been properly supervised, et cetera, et cetera. But you yourself have not been damaged by the, in quote, transgression, because the transgression wasn't really a transgression, because it was out of your hands entirely. But down here, no, you've still now imbibed the spiritual impurity and damaging qualities that go with the non-kosher meat. And whether you meant to or not, whether you knew it or not, you're messed up. And now you have to engage in some form of healing process of some supernatural kind in order to rebalance yourself and rebalance the cosmic order. Duress really only works in this model. We're going to look in the Torah and see the classic example of duress as an understatement, and see which way the Torah is leaning in understanding whether this should be our model or whether this should be our model. You with me? Okay. We are on page 1120, Parashat Ki Teitzei, and this is going to begin on chapter 22 of Deuteronomy, verse 23. And I'm going to need a volunteer. Thank you.
In the case of a virgin.
By the way, just going to point out, the word virgin in English is gender neutral, or at least gender obscured. Within Hebrew, this particular virgin is a woman.
In the case of a virgin who is engaged to a man, if a man comes upon her in town and lies with her, you shall take the two of them out to the gate of that town and stone them to death. The girl, because she did not cry for help in the town, and the man, because he violated another man's wife. Thus you will sweep away evil from your midst.
All right. Very straightforward, yes?
Yep.
Come on. You guys have all been studying with me long enough to know it's never that straightforward. All right, so first of all, let's get a couple points out of the way that are necessary, because the way English talks about certain things and the way Hebrew talks about certain things are very different. So the word engaged, right? Within Hebrew, within biblical law and within Jewish law, engaged doesn't mean, will you marry me? Right? Engaged means hare at mekudeshet li, right? You put the ring on with the declaration that you are now betrothed to me. And historically, there would then be a pause while the man got his affairs in order to prepare the wedding feast and party and all of that, which could take up to a year, which was sort of the common time frame. So that would be the equivalent in our modern wedding ceremony of standing under the chuppah. He puts the ring on her finger. She says, "Excuse me," goes into the back room with the best man and has hanky-panky.
Or already having the marriage license they've already gotten.
Well, I mean,
the contract is already entered into at this point. The marriage
Right.
contract has already been.
right.
So
That's what engagement means
Right,
in
and
Jewish law.
having the license, but not yet the ceremony. So we're in this.
Well, you've actually, as far as Jewish law is concerned, you've done what we now consider the Jewish ceremony halfway.
Right.
It's just historically that halfway mark was separate from the final part, which was the seven blessings, the Sheva Brachot. So when it says that she was already someone else's wife and that she is committing adultery while doing this, you have to understand that that's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about, he gave her a ring in a restaurant. We're talking about there was actually a formal ceremony that marked the betrothal, that was witnessed and agreed upon, a contract, if you will, rather than simply a loose promise that someday we might want to actually get married. You should also maybe know this, maybe you don't, understand that in European law used to think of engagement more like Jewish law. It used to be that you could take a man to court for betrayal, for breaking a promise, if he had proposed to a woman and then backed out. That was a very big deal, all the way up until almost the modern times. Somewhere in late Victorian is when it began to peter out as being an actionable criminal offense. Well, civil damages for a man to break faith for a breach of contract.
So this is more than a sotah.
Well, no, sota was actually a wife, right?
Okay, but there's more than suspicion. There are witnesses.
Oh yeah. So let's get to the second half, right? So the second half is, now that we know that she is wife-ish, even if they haven't finished the wedding, if she is at least engaged, and absolutely if she's also more than engaged, then it's adultery and it counts as adultery. But how do we know it actually happened? This is not suspicion. This is not like back in the book of Numbers where you have a woman whose husband thinks she's been fooling around.
To a house and they were
Exactly
there, and I kind of heard whispering and some noises.
Yeah, and she's always been making goo-goo eyes at him. No, that's not what this is. This is, there were witnesses to the act, not to the seclusion. I mean, they would have seen the seclusion too, but to the actual hanky-panky.
They couldn't keep their hands off of them. They're in the middle of the marketplace, and I saw it, she saw it, he saw it.
Or down a back alley or whatever you like, when he lifted up her skirt and he lifted up his... I'm just making sure that we understand that we are talking about a case where it's not, they went into a hotel room together, which is not proof of adultery in Jewish law, right? It's proof that you probably want to get a divorce, but it's not proof of adultery. This is, they saw the act consummated between the woman and someone not her husband. That's the facts of what we're dealing with here.
And that makes the line that says the girl is in trouble because she didn't cry out for help in the town.
Mm-hmm.
That means there were people around.
In your time.
Able to help.
Who could see and who could hear.
But they didn't actually take an action to protect her because she didn't ask for help.
Okay, so that then comes into the question is, do we imagine that she was under duress or not? What does the Torah seem to imagine in this case? Was she a willing partner or was she an unwilling partner?
She was knowing and volunteered.
Right, in this half, right, we haven't got to the second half of the paragraph yet, but in this half of the paragraph, it's the Torah setting up a case where you have a woman and a guy, and they seem to agree that they like each other's company. and they are willing to go as far as one can go when liking one's company. And therefore, as she is a willing partner, this is a classic case of adultery. And the penalty for adultery is death with witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. The proof that we have that she was a willing adulteress is the fact that she didn't cry out. That's because, I mean, otherwise all you have are two bodies moving in the shadows in the alleyway, right? So how do you know she was a willing partner unless she has like a big sign up that says, I am a willing partner?
This is an exception to the general rule that silence never equals consent.
Well, is it, right? So that's the question. So does that mean if we were to see this happening and he had a piece of tape over her mouth, that we would say, well, I didn't hear anything from her, so she must have agreed. If he has a knife to her throat,
that's different.
Do we say, oh, the Torah says she didn't cry out?
No. Well, there again, too, sometimes you're so frightened you can't open your mouth either.
And maybe she is just petrified from the threat. Maybe she's just totally petrified of everything that is happening. Just, has been stunned silent by everything that's happening.
But taking them to the gate of that town, does that imply that they're going to have, that's where the judges sit, and that they're going to have a thorough inquiry?
There will definitely be a thorough inquiry, but I wanted to make sure that we are aware of some of these issues of how do we uncover the intent of the participants. And what the Torah is trying to tell us here is that the intent matters. Right? We're not done yet figuring out how to get to intent, but what we are recognizing is that the intent seems to matter. Now, the man's intent, we already know. Under Jewish law, we understand that a man who is engaged in relations with a woman has at least some intent to be engaging in those actions.
Yeah, he's up to no good.
Well, because if he really, 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 really didn't want to, his body wouldn't cooperate, right? That there's a certain willingness that goes along with the male physical reproductive organ. And if it's not willing, it ain't able. And therefore, if he's involved, we know that he is, to at least some degree, willing, or else he couldn't. Right? You take somebody who is absolutely repulsed at the thought of being with this other person because it's someone else's wife, and the apparatus is not going to function. You take somebody who maybe normally would be opposed to being with someone else's wife, but he does kind of sort of want to, and now it's possible for him to perform the deed. So for the man, we have a biological marker of his intention. For the woman, we don't. And that's what the Torah is trying to tell us. But in both cases, the intention matters. And if they didn't intend to, we would be having a different conversation, says the Torah, which is in fact what we get in the next piece.
But if the man comes upon the engaged girl in the open country and the man lies with her by force, only the man who lay with her shall die, but you shall do nothing to the girl. The girl did not incur the death penalty, for this case is like that of a man attacking another and murdering him. He came upon her in the open, though the engaged girl cried for help. There was no one to save her. All
right, so some very important things that come from this. I didn't have time to fit it. I didn't have space to fit it on my handout, but I can share it verbally, which is the rabbis pointed out that why bring the comparison of murdering to someone else? We don't need that comparison. The Torah tells us what we need to know by itself. And they say, actually, this is to tell us something about the case of murder that we're learning from this case of rape, which is, just as in a case of rape, if you see somebody attacking, you have an obligation to stop them, up to and including taking the life of the attacker. So too in the case of a potential murder. You have the opportunity and you have the obligation to stop the murder from taking place, up to and including taking the life of the potential murderer, even though the potential murderer has not committed a crime yet, or even in a case where a man has not yet committed the act of rape and adultery. You can stop them from going to the next step and conclusion, even if it means killing the attacker. And that's something we learn about defense against murder from defense against rape.
In this case, we do see that he's lying with her by
By
force.
But how do we know that he was lying with her by force?
That you have to see.
Well, so we still, by the way, we notice we still need to have witnesses here.
But there was no one there.
Ah, but how can we adjudicate that he is guilty of the crime of raping her if there were no witnesses?
She
She
survived.
said,
One person's testimony can never convict someone for a capital
Yeah,
crime.
too.
She's bruised, bloodied, and cut up.
For all we know, that was her husband who did that to her.
Maybe he admitted it?
Self-confession doesn't count as testimony,
Yeah.
right?
It takes.
There had to have been witnesses present who were, for some reason, unable to save her, but she was in a position where she would not have expected there to have been anyone to save her. So what we're getting at here very convolutedly, which is what the Torah is really good at sometimes, but it's good because it makes us think, is the understanding that even though there were witnesses who could have saved her, because she was in a setting where she did not expect there to be anyone to save her, even if she keeps her mouth shut and doesn't cry out for help, the witnesses shouldn't assume that she was a willing participant in the act. Because you might otherwise say, well, look, they're out in the field and she's just lying there and not protesting. But instead, the Torah is telling us, even if you see her in the field, lying there with him, not protesting, not fighting back, you can't say she's willing, because we have to assume that she would protest if she thought there was somebody nearby. Which, by the way, you're nearby, go help her.
Yeah, right.
Which is the intention, but the other intention of this is to teach us that sometimes it's really hard to know the intention. And in this case, the benefit of the doubt for the intention is going that she was an unwilling participant, and her silence doesn't mean that she was going along with him. It just means that she didn't expect anyone to be around to save her. Make sense? It's hard because,
That's a big assumption, yeah.
well, but that's the problem, is how do we get to uncover intentionality in cases where we can't crawl into the brain of the people who are involved in that. And again, notice that there are many other solutions, if you'd like to call it that, for this particular problem. You could say any woman who is raped is now damaged, right? She must have been a willing participant. She must have deserved it. She must have been egging him on. She must have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. We could take that argument and just say, if we saw her, unless she was kicking, screaming, and fighting with all of her strength, we should just assume that in some way, shape, or form, she is a participant in this act. And therefore, she's guilty as well as her partner. Judaism does not go down that road. The other road could say, no woman under any circumstances would ever have sex with anyone other than her husband willingly. Judaism also doesn't go down that route, believing that every woman is a saint. There are, unfortunately, women who willingly commit adultery. And what the Torah is trying to tell us is that it's really hard sometimes to figure out what is going on when you see an action like this, and that what the people think they're doing makes a difference of life and death. And we need to examine this more to figure out how to unravel this question, which is why we have our commentary. All right, so first we start off from Sifrei. This is one of the earliest midrashim on Devarim. If you would start us off.
But to the maiden you shall not do a thing. The maiden does not have a sin of death.
Right, which is the more literal translation as opposed to does not incur the death penalty, which was in our verse 26.
We are hereby taught that Scripture exempts her from the death penalty. Whence is it derived that it exempts her from an offering as well?
Right, so here's the option. What if she's not guilty of adultery and doesn't have to be murdered, but what if she is sort of kind of guilty of all of this and therefore has to bring a sacrifice to the temple to cleanse her of her sin? All right, what if she needs some other remedy because there was definitely a sin involved, even if it's not a mortal sin, even if it's not a capital crime? Onward.
Whence is it derived that she is exempt from stripes as well?
Oh, well, I think you forgot the italics bit.
Whence is it derived that it exempts her from an offering as well, from a sin of death?
From a sin of death, right? So what the Midrash is cueing in on is the fact that we have this weird phrase, chet mavet, right? Which is a weird compound word, which is being translated as sin of death here, or is being translated as death penalty in our JPS translation. And they're saying the phrase sin of death, the chet of chet mavet, that's telling us that she's committed no sin. Therefore, she doesn't need to bring an offering. Right? You don't need to bring an offering if you haven't made a sin. Make sense? So the fact that it uses the word sin means that she didn't have one, that she is sinless in this act. And then the second half of that phrase of chet mavet, the mavet, is going to teach us something else.
Whence is it derived that she is exempt from stripes as well?
Stripes, by the way, means flogging.
From a sin of death. Stripes being in place of death.
Right? So oftentimes if the person wasn't quite able to be proven as a capital criminal, they would be flogged instead. And the idea here is to say, no, in no way, shape, or form is she in that category. Therefore, flogging is not done either. So when it says do nothing, really do nothing. And how do we know it? Because it uses this phrase, chet mavet, to make sure that we rule out she needs a sacrifice and to rule out that she needs to be flogged. Good? Because otherwise, people might have thought, okay, we can't execute her, but we can still get her some other way. Onward.
We are hereby taught that she is exempt from all the punishments in the Torah.
Right, so it's inclusive of all of them.
For in the field did he find her. I might think that in the city she is liable, and in the field not. It is therefore written, she cried out and no one could save her. The implication being that if one could save her and she did not cry out, she is liable.
Right? So what this is trying to say is, imagine that she's out in the field as part of the harvest party. And the guy and her go behind one of the bales of hay and begin to interact with each other. Well, in that case, it doesn't matter that they're in a field. She knows on the other side of that bale of hay is the rest of the village out harvesting. All she has to do is go, help, and they've got it, and she can be saved. So being in the field doesn't magically mean that she was an unwilling partner. It's being alone means we have to imagine that she was an unwilling partner. But if she knew that there were people right over that bale, then we do have to believe that her intention was to be a willing participant, unless there is evidence, again, to the contrary, knife to the throat or threats or some other reason that might have made her unwilling to cry out, even if she thought help was nearby.
Like the Patty Hearst case, she was caught, had the machine gun with the bank robbers,
right.
The terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
They said, well, she wasn't alone, she could cry out for help. Was she under duress? He claimed she was,
right.
And that they had guns, and so she couldn't cry out.
Figuring out intention is one of the hardest things we can ever do.
If she has no potential savers, both in the city and in the field, she is not liable. If she has savers, both in the city and in the field, she is liable. Right.
So again, going back to our city thing, just because she was attacked in the city doesn't mean that we always assume that she was a willing participant. If she doesn't believe there was anyone to save her in that area, or that there was no reason why she would imagine her call for help would be answered, or that it would cause more harm than good, then we are unable to say that she was a willing participant, right? Even if she was in the middle of a crowded marketplace, if he somehow was able to get her to not call out by some other threat or form of coercion, then we don't say, but she could have called and someone would have had. We don't believe that. And therefore we say she cannot be proven as a willing participant. Difficult, yes? Yes. All right. Onward.
In the field he found her. Could it be that in the city she is automatically liable and in the field she is exempt? Learn from what the verse that says, she did scream, which may determine whether or not she is culpable. But the verse goes on, if she had a rescuer. In that case, whether in the city or the field, she is liable. But if she had no rescuer, whether in the city or the field, she is exempt.
Right, so reinforcing what we saw in the first lines of the midrash above. Right, it's not as simple as in the city, in the field. It is more nuanced than that, and that's why the Torah uses these additional phrases of has a rescuer, screamed, didn't scream. It's trying to tell us that figuring out intention is complicated. Here are some general guidelines, but it can go back and forth depending upon the details of a particular case. All right. Now, in general, Mishnah Sanhedrin is going to tell us a little bit about what the obligations of a rescuer are.
These may be saved from transgression with their lives, i.e. by killing them.
Right? So we're saving a person from sin. And the way we save them from sinning is by killing them before they can commit the sin. Right? This is the fact that we know that if someone is running down the street, for example, with a knife saying, I'm going to kill him, I'm going to kill him, I'm going to kill him, and the only way to stop him is to shoot him, well, he hasn't killed anyone yet. Why do we have the right to execute them? Exactly. I mean, it's something that we take as being almost self-evident. But anytime you go to take someone's life, you have to understand when you can and when you can't. So, for example, if I say the guy is running down the street saying, tomorrow I'm going to rob a bank, tomorrow I'm going to rob a bank, tomorrow I'm going to rob a bank, are you allowed to shoot me?
No.
And say, no, he said he was going to rob the bank tomorrow. No, of course you can't shoot him. Right? So tomorrow I'm going to drive 55 in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. Can you shoot me to prevent me from breaking the law? No. Tomorrow I'm going to eat pork. Can you shoot me? No. Right? But so they have to narrow down when you are allowed to use this level of extrajudicial killing to prevent a person from committing a crime that they haven't actually committed yet.
One who pursues his fellow to kill him, and one who pursues a male or a betrothed maiden to rape them. But one who pursues an animal to commit bestiality, and one who intends to desecrate the Sabbath, and one who intends to worship idols, one may not save them with their lives.
Now you can save them in other ways, right? You can go and talk to them, you can cajole them, you can, if you think there's an actual high enough probability, you can even sort of, hold them captive for a while until you can try to get them to stop from this crazy plan. But you're not allowed to shoot them. You're not allowed to execute them before they have committed, even though these are all horrible, horrible things, which generally we would need to give up our life rather than do.
So in the beginning of the first sentence, where it says he's pursuing his fellow, so
Yep. The chaser.
so there is somebody in front of him, and the person is running behind him with the weapon.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. Or the guy's running after the woman saying, I'm going to get you and I'm going to rape you. And I'm standing, 100 feet away and I've got a rifle and nothing else. If the only way I can stop him from raping her is to shoot him, then I shoot him.
The question on the first clause, these may be saved from transgression. Who is being saved, the victim or the perpetrator?
The perpetrator. We are saving them from adding the sin to themselves.
We're saving them from extra time in hell.
No, to go back to our line here, right? Right now they are here, and they're about to add a really, really big negative.
So
we're making sure that their journey finishes before that big negative gets added to their current state.
And so these are, and I got that, but these are very limited.
Absolutely. These cases and only these cases.
And I bring that up because I know that certain Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, their Grand Mufti gives the explanation why they have so many death penalty cases is we're saving these poor people from terrible fate, so we kill them.
Yeah, the Judaism doesn't really go down that road.
Yeah, it's a logic that's difficult for some of us to.
Well, and it's it is difficult to wrap our head around the idea that this is somehow beneficial to the pursuer. we can easily understand that it's beneficial to the pursued.
And in the Western world, that's how it's benefiting the pursuer is a novel idea, but it's one that does make sense.
Right. Well, because ultimately, remember, they're still not guilty yet. Right? The guy who, right, the attempted murderer,
He's just saying it, but he hasn't done it.
Exactly. And so the Torah wants to make sure that we understand that in every other case, no matter what the person's saying, you're not allowed to say, well, if you did that tomorrow, then that would be terrible for you, so I'm going to help you by killing you today. Only in these cases, and it is a very clear and present danger, to borrow American Supreme Court language, it does have to be not just the guy said, you know, I think next year I'm going to do something. You're not allowed to say, well, wow, bam. You can stop them next year, but you can't stop them 365 days early, because hopefully they'll change their mind before next year rolls around.
Well, what about this law in Florida?
The stand your ground?
Yeah.
Right. Well, stand your ground is...
Doesn't that kind of give you...
If your life is threatened, that's what
But
standing
it's,
ground means.
but it's
Right.
your...
So the Florida law is...
intention.
Right. Well, the Florida law is confusing in some aspects because it seems to be dependent upon a definition of reasonable perception of danger, which many people will have very different understandings of. You're not actually in danger if the person has their back to you and is walking away, as opposed to, well, I really, really thought he was going to still come back and do that.
Yeah.
That's where it gets a little tricky.
Okay.
Judaism has a similar type of thing where, in fact, you're not allowed to, in quote, stand your ground if you don't have a reasonable expectation of danger. So the classic example is the thief breaking into your house. If the thief breaks into your house at night, then there is a reasonable expectation that he knew you would be there and that he was prepared to harm you. Therefore, you are allowed to respond with deadly force if necessary. But if a thief breaks into your house during the day, well, during the day, in the classic world, people were all out doing their jobs and in the fields. He probably thought no one would be home, and he did not have violent intention when he broke into the house.
That's actually American common law. There's a difference between a burglary and a robbery.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But the stand your ground is a modification of what was our old common law, which was basically Jewish law.
Exactly. All right, but
Okay.
Florida law is not my specialty, so let's keep moving.
Just go.
Even though in the end she stopped resisting, that is, she became a willing partner, seeing that initially she had been forced, she is exonerated by judicial prosecution. Our sages go so far as to state, even if she said that had she not been forced, she would have hired the man in question to sleep with her.
All right, so that's fair enough.
Okay, that's an interesting...
Right, well, they wanted to make sure that we were absolutely 100% clear that her intentionality mattered at the beginning of the act. So if he grabs her and he starts to rape her, and she is absolutely opposed to this, that is all that matters for defining the act. Even if by the end of it, and this is meant as hyperbole, not meant as a common occurrence, right? Even if in the most outlandish of circumstances you could imagine, by the end of it, she's like, actually, you know what? He's amazing and wonderful, and I would have hired him to do this to me if I had only known. It doesn't matter. It's still rape, right? Even if in some fantasy world she ends up enjoying it, it was still rape because she was attacked at the beginning. And that's what the sages of the Talmud want us to understand.
Well, that makes sense.
Well, it makes sense, but can you imagine the visuals of that? Right? The rescuers come running in after they hear her crying out, and by the time they get there, she's like, no, let him finish. This is great. You might think that she is guilty of adultery, and she's not. Right? She's guilty of being overcome by her libido, you might say. But what's that? But if it started as rape, it doesn't matter what it ends as. And again, that's very different than many of our gut instincts would be in the same case. In our gut, we'd probably say, it's terrible that she ended up blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, this is still coercion. This is still her being manipulated by the situation. Therefore, she is not liable, and he absolutely still is.
Well, because it's the whole, you know, defense of, well, yeah, she kind of pushed me away at first, but then she liked it.
Right, exactly. You know, some girls like to play hard to get. They want to feel conquered and other such things. I thought when she said no that it was just part of our play. You know, that
no didn't really mean no.
Exactly. And the Torah is saying, even if she ended up at the end showing every sign that she was pleased with the outcome, if she said no at the beginning and you still went, you are still a rapist. Right? The Torah is unequivocal about that. Even if our modern judicial system still has trouble getting that through its head. Right? If you went without consent, even if she retroactively would have given you consent, it still counts as rape. And all the more so if by the end of it, she wouldn't have given consent, then even more so. You can't convince yourself, let alone a court, that what you did was anything other than rape. All right, so mitzvah 557. This is from Sefer HaChinuch.
Not to punish one coerced into a sin.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more generally, says the Sefer.
We have been prevented from judging one who is coerced into doing a sin, which is to say that we should not punish any person for a thing that he does against his will. And this is a negative commandment that includes anyone that is coerced into doing a bad deed, that we should not punish him for it. The root of this commandment is known to every person with intelligence.
Which I love that phrase of his, right? Like any idiot understands this. Which is?
That it is not fitting to punish any creature for that which he does against his will and not for his own benefit.
Right. And yet, going back to our model here, there are some that view the universe as, well, I don't care whether you wanted to do it or not, you have now been contaminated. And therefore, there needs to be a punishment. And Sefer HaChinuch, speaking on behalf of our tradition, is saying, don't be stupid. Right? If you're forced into doing something, then whether it was a positive or minus doesn't affect you. It can affect you psychologically, emotionally, and all of that. But as far as the spiritual and religious aspects of it, you remain unchanged. Right? Yes, emotionally, psychologically, all those other things, the trauma of any event that you're coerced into do, whether it be rape or murder or any other horrible things that have happened throughout history, that's still going to leave a lasting impact on you. But the spiritual impact, the religious impact, what the Torah is trying to help us understand here is zero. Right? You did not sin, even though had you been willing, it would have been a major sin. Make sense? Good. Of course it makes sense, because you are people with at least intelligence, as he says. Continuing on the next page.
From the laws of this commandment are what they, may their memory be blessed, said that a court does not kill a person who transgresses out of coercion, even one of the three sins that a person is to die for and not transgress, except for if he transgressed and has sexual relations with a forbidden partner. As this is not complete coercion, since there cannot be an erection without volition.
Right, as we discussed before. So notice what he's trying to say here is, if, as I mentioned at the beginning, if I forced one of you to murder someone else, even though the right thing to do would be to say, I won't take another person's life to save my own, another innocent life, even if you did it, the court couldn't prosecute you for it afterwards. When the bandits leave and you're left to face the music of your behavior, you still can't be prosecuted because you were forced to do it. The only exception is for a man to engage in a forbidden relationship against his will, because some aspect of his will willed it, or else he wouldn't have physically been able to do it. But
if a woman is coerced to have sexual relations, she is exempt. Even if, after the rapist begins to rape her, she says, leave him alone, she is still exempt, since it is her evil impulse that is overpowered.
The Yetzer Hara, not like that she's particularly evil, it's just her body was inflamed, and it's a physical reaction, not anything that actually represents her personal willful intent. And again, this is not meant to be a statement that that's a likely scenario. It is being used as the far end of hyperbole to make sure that we understand that it is, even in that fantasy realm, not something that we would ever make her be liable for. Make sense? Okay. Just want to make sure people really, really understand that the Torah and the Talmud was not saying that that was a likely situation. Onwards to mitzvah 558.
The commandment on the rapist to marry the one he has raped.
Okay, so we didn't read this section, but I did want to include a little bit of the commentary on it because it does help us fill in more about what the Torah wanted to understand about the relationships between men and women. So if you continue reading on your own time from where we left off, which is verse 28 on chapter 22, it goes into the case of what happens if a man attacks a woman that isn't married or betrothed, right? Which is not adultery. And therefore, what is the punishment? And the upshot of that is that he has to marry her. He pays a penalty and has to marry her. Now, we need to unpack that a little bit to understand what her status is in this, because this is not trying to say, like there is in some countries, even to this day, that a rape victim must marry their attacker as being obligatory. This is the raper must be prepared to marry the victim, not that the victim must marry him. And that difference of word order makes all the difference. But let Sefer HaHinuch explain it a little bit.
We have been commanded that one who rapes a virgin maiden must marry her as a wife, and that he must give to her father 50 silver shekel coins.
All right, by the way, a lot of people really misunderstand that. Why does he give the money to the father?
She's a property.
No. Because if he gives it to her, it becomes his again.
Fee.
No, it becomes his.
Oh, right.
Right?
Because then he
In
marries
the
her,
ancient
and
world,
that-
when a man was married to a woman,
her property
she
became-
didn't have independent property. So if he was to marry her and then give her 50 shekels, it would go into her hands and back to his pocket. So he has to give it to someone else for it to actually be a penalty. So that's why it's going to her father, not because he's purchasing her, not because it's some sale of chattel. It is because otherwise it wouldn't be a penalty. Now, in modern systems where we have independent bank accounts and women are actually allowed to have their own property, both under Jewish law as well as under secular law, the case would be different. But the Torah was talking to a society where that economic structure was very, very different. And you have to understand what's being ruled here as under that economic structure, not as a recommendation or celebration of that economic structure, but simply an acknowledgement that that is the way money was handled in the ancient world. Onward.
It is from the roots of this commandment that it is in order to restrain the villains from this evil deed, and that the daughters of Israel should not be as if abandoned.
Right, so this is the overall framework. They say, why did the Torah decree this? One, as a deterrence, and two, to protect the women. Now, again, that second half may seem a little hard to swallow, which is why he goes on.
Since if the rapist thinks he can fill his desire with her and just walk away, it will be a light in his eyes to do so many times.
Right, if there's no consequence for rape, then people will keep raping.
But if he has in mind that she will be tied to him and that he will be held responsible for the obligation of her sustenance, clothing, and appointed times all of his days, and that even if he gets sick of her, he will never have the option of divorcing her, and that he will have to give to her father 50 silver shekel coins immediately, he will truly suppress his evil impulse and prevent himself from doing this villainy that comes with such a penalty.
All right, so again, he's pointing out the astuteness of the Torah for understanding human thought, which is there are two penalties that are tied to this. Right? One is you have to marry her and you can never divorce her. And marry means you have to provide for her and support her. And you have to pay a penalty today. Because for some people, 50 shekels today is a more real threat, right? I don't know what tomorrow will bring. Maybe I want to be with her for the rest of our lives. You know, maybe he's deluded into some sort of lovesick puppy syndrome. And it's the immediate 50 shekels that's going to slap him out of taking this plan. For some others, they may think, yeah, 50 shekels, bam, no problem. By the way, 50 shekels was a lot of money back then, a lot more than 50 shekels would be today. It was the normal amount you would pay as the ketubah for a wife for life. So it's a big, big penalty. But maybe the 50 shekels wasn't anything to him. But thinking, I'm going to have to spend the rest of my days taking care of her, maybe that would be enough to dissuade him. So the two different penalties, one short-term, one long-term, are really hitting both sides of the human psychology to try and head him off from doing this by triggering either his short-term interests or his long-term interests, because different people respond to different triggers. And
there is also in this a little comfort for this poor, embarrassed woman, and that she will stay with him forever, lest another man would embarrass her with this evil thing that happened to her.
Right? So, ancient world, people weren't always nice. Imagine she has now been attacked and she's been raped, and this guy has just left her discarded.
And the women start gossiping, and the men start gossiping. Well,
everyone.
She's a real slut because we all know that she did this. You know.
Even if they don't go that far, it's still going to be difficult for her to have the same standing in her community that she had before. And other guys may say, well, you know, you did it with him, so how about, and this at least puts her under someone's protection. Because again, in the economic world of the ancient world, the economics of the ancient world, a woman needed to be under some form of male property ownership in order for her to have security that she'll be able to still have food and things. Again, doesn't mean the Torah recommends that as being the ideal economic system, but the Torah was talking to people who lived under that economic system. And so it had to make sure that it took into consideration those needs. Thankfully, we don't have those needs today. But even in those cases, in the next paragraph, we're going to see that she is still protected if she would like a different solution.
And the sages said that if a raped woman does not want, or her father does not want for her to marry him, we do not force her.
Right? So this is not marry your rapist law. This is you can force him to take care of you forever law if you want to. But if you'd rather never see his ugly face again, that's fine too. Keep going.
But if the rapist does not want, we force him to marry her, even if she is lame or blind or has tzara'at. And he may not put her out ever. And this woman does not have a wedding contract, ketubah.
Right, so she doesn't get a ketubah. Why does she not get a ketubah? Because she's never going to get divorced, right? A ketubah is a promise to pay, if there's a divorce or his death, a certain amount of money. Well, she's not going to be divorced. Unless she wants to, by the way. She does still have the option to petition even later to the court to force him to grant to let her go.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions.
But yeah. So she doesn't have to decide only at that moment.
She has the right to divorce him, but he doesn't have the right
Correct.
To divorce her. So that's a right that he no longer has.
And he gave up the moment he attacked her. Exactly.
But she has that to hold over his head.
Yep. If she wants,
as long as she wants.
Right. And if she thinks that she can find a better life and be supported somewhere else, then by all means, let her find a better life away from this guy and be supported by someone else. So that was meant as economic protection for her, but not a prison for her. That she would have that option, but she wouldn't have that obligation. He, on the other hand, forfeited his options the moment he attacked her. Right? He has a lifetime debt to her from the moment he first attacked her. Now, about the ketubah, as long as we're talking about that, Sefer HaChinuch would like to explain to us why we have ketubot in the first place.
And what is the reason that the sages established the marriage contract? It was in order that it not be light in the eyes of the husband to divorce her. And he cannot divorce this one. If the woman raped was forbidden to him to marry, even if it is from a positive obligation, And even if it is a secondary prohibition, behold, this one does not marry her. And so too, if he finds something lewd about her after he brings her in, he should divorce her, as it is stated, and she shall be a wife to him, a wife that is fitting for him.
All right, so there are certain categories of people who can't get married, in which case he would simply have to handle the financial penalty and wouldn't be able to marry her, because we can't contravene one Torah law to protect another. And if she, when it says lewd, if she is found to have committed adultery after they've been married, then yes, he doesn't have to stay married to her forever. So it doesn't give her license to do whatever she wants. She still has to be within a marriage, and that means monogamy. But apart from that, he's with her forever. But notice what he said about the ketubot, right? Why should we have ketubot in the first place? Because if you didn't have a contract from the beginning that spelled out to the man what the price he would have to pay if he was to send this woman off, if he was to divorce her, and not talking about this woman, but any woman, then men wouldn't consider the implications of divorce seriously enough. Because for them, there would be very little penalty, right? They're the ones who own the property. They're the ones who own the resources. They're the ones who own the liquid assets. And if they decide that, hey, I just don't like her much anymore, bye, and there is no debt that he now has to pay her for doing so, then women would be exceedingly vulnerable.
It's also, it's about more than lust, it's about a relationship.
Exactly. And sometimes to make a relationship, you also need more than love. You need to sign on the dotted line and say, even if things go bad, I am going to make sure that you don't end up completely bankrupt because of our relationship. And that was why the sages instituted the ketubah, and why to this day we still require a ketubah. Now, we generally live now in Western-style democracies that have protections built into them as well, which is really good that the Western world caught up. But this is the beginning of that idea, that a woman should not be totally at the mercy of her husband. And indeed, in many other passages, the Talmud and Jewish law goes into great detail that a husband is not at liberty to treat his wife badly, and that a husband is not free to rape his wife or to force her into intercourse if she is not willing. But that may be a lesson for another day. All right.
There's the passage in Exodus, of course, when Moses is told, only bring the hard cases to Moses.
Yeah.
And that there must have been a series of very difficult cases which required him to ask the Lord to.
It's no fun. And unfortunately, these things
are not easy things to work through. These are very difficult cases.
And they have always happened. But as you can see, the Torah and Jewish law has tried to A, deter them from happening, and B, ensure that there is a proper penalty within the structure of the times that can protect the victims. All right, take care.
Thank you.
May I ask a very fast question?
Of course.
It's a little bit different, but it has always confused me. When Judah had